of History of Three Internationals by William Z. Foster, hosted by Anti-Imperialist America, hosted by me, Dust James, and my co-host, live from Australia, David Fox. It's Go ahead.
Massive g'day here from Australia.
Sorry for being a little bit late. Everybody who's just turning on. Is how it goes sometimes. I hope if you can see this, if anybody's watching this, please comment to see that it's finally streaming and working. Just a little bit of background. This study was largely inspired for me to do by a comrade out in the Southwest, Matt Cedillo. This is his book of poetry. I recommend folks getting. If people look on my channel, they can see I was interviewed by Matt Cedillo, and you can get a link there to buy his book, Mowing Leaves of Grass. He's the one who recommended this software, and I was largely inspired to do this by his study, which he called The Poet and the Professor, a co-hosted study on Volume 1 of Capital. And that's what I largely got the inspiration to do this. And thank you again, David Fox, for being a part. I haven't done a study to this scale in a long time. I've been mostly working and getting my YouTube. I'm finally getting back into doing more study. It's great to have the technology we have today. This is incredible, international live broadcasted study of a great book. I don't see any live comments as of yet. I'm going to go to my channel and see if I can see it live there. Yep, it's live now. There's 4 people watching it. Looks like everything good. I didn't share it to Facebook or anything. Okay. Maybe while I'm doing this, before we start into it, if you, David Fox, if you want to tell us a little bit about William Z. Foster, while I'm sharing this around.
Certainly. Well, I actually came through I came across this book and William Z. Foster actually through Caleb Maupin. One of his live chats, he was a discussion on some of the material he reads, and it was amazing. It's quite interesting. I read a little bit more into his works, obviously this one, and obviously too from Caleb's book for the US Communist Party and his role in that, and William Z. Foster's important role in that party at that time, right through the 50s. I found actually his works are quite easily understood. They're very easy to read, so it's for us generally working class people, we can actually absorb it because some material gets out there. There's a lot to take in, and especially on an important subject like this, of the history of the 3 internationals. There's a lot more that could have been written, and of course it's quite a thick book, as you can see. Sorry, the screen there, and so obviously we want people to thoroughly absorb the history and to understand it as well. So, and what way he wrote, and a lot of his comrades at the time, where he wrote it simply, he obviously did his research as well, but it was there for us so we can all understand and we discuss further. I think it's what was interesting about those Marxists back then, or communists back then in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, is just how connected they were to the everyday, ordinary people, through the masses, and just how they can actually use the language they used, and basically the masses got it. They got the message, and so I highly recommend it. Look, if anyone hasn't got a copy of the 3 Internationals, William Z. Foster, just Google it, order it through online on there. Obviously, it's still in print, so and yeah, so I think it's something worthwhile. So here we go.
Okay. I shared a few places. Hopefully, a few more people will join us. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. We're going to get right into it. We talked about the format of how we're going to do this study,
Yep.
as each chapter um, is going to be led by uh, one of us. I'm going to do the even chat. I mean the the odd chapters, starting with number one, and then the even chapters will be done by David Fox, and then we'll respond to each other after leading, and we're going to try to make some connections with other works and current day. So I'm going to get right into the first one. This we're starting at part one, the First International, 1864 to 1876. Those following along, this starts on page 13, and in this edition. Okay.
Yep. Can I just say there's something here too? I'll just add in something. We just briefly spoke this. I was taking down a lot of notes. I usually write it in point form,
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. So hopefully some parts of it, because there's a lot to take in. So that's why I tend to write these things down. And
All
look,
right.
if anyone out there, if they wish to make quotations or any questions, feel free to put it in the chats or take down notes themselves. I think, and obviously, if you want to clarify something, feel free to answer in the chat. Oh, sorry, ask in the chat.
Yes, yes. Anybody, we love participation. If anybody wants to just say hi, if they have any questions, comments, or it'd be great. All right, so we're starting with the first section, general economic and political background. I love this. I love how William Z. Foster writes. Clean, to the point, scientific, leads right into the material conditions that created or fomented or had in which the First International really came about. And it goes right into it. It came about is in the Industrial Revolution. This is the changing between feudalism into capitalism and the mechanical machinery from from mostly agricultural work into the industrial age. Okay, I'm looking over my notes.
Yep.
Industrial Revolution, use of coal and steam engines in factories and steamships, boats. This brought the world, just as the internet today has brought the world closer together. The International Revolution was bringing the world closer together, making a political in a system or a formation like a political like a international political institution like the First International, the Workmen's Association. Before the Industrial Revolution, I mean, this was largely impossible. Um, because now you have with trains and steamboats and ways of communicating faster, you're able to, and ways of traveling faster, you're able to have an international revolution, an international organization to address the the shrinking world problems that associating. It's the becoming of the zeitgeist. Um, keep going. At large, the Industrial Revolution largely started in England, and it was interesting. It was funded by colonization in the Americas and India. Basically, the material capital that made the Industrial Revolution possible in England was stole from the colonized people. And William Z. Foster points that out. You have something called the political consolidation of capital, feudalism becoming capitalism, also the emergence of industry in the United States, and the beginnings of a new system and a new world material conditions of the Industrial Revolution brings about it defines not only the current existence, but the material the conditions define what happens in the resistance. The Industrial Revolution, the beginnings of capitalism overtaking feudalism, those conditions are the thesis, and the comings of the Socialist International, First Socialist International, is the antithesis. That pushes, I believe it actually pushes it helps in a large way the working class forces, and those representing the working class forces helped push the bourgeoisie into power, and were largely part of a major force of the industrial. I mean, the First International was helping the bourgeoisie come to power and putting down backward systems of feudalism and slavery in the United States. It also had to do with, I don't know, let me see where, yeah, okay. Let me catch up with my notes. In this period, you had the beginning of the Chartist movement, early union movements in England, union organizing in the Americas. You had the American Revolution, the creation of the Bill of Rights, the beginnings of bourgeois revolution, the idea of democratic rights. You also had an interesting force, which was kind of odd, was the Luddites in England, which actually wanted to go backwards. They saw their conditions changing into the industrial revolution, and instead of saying, oh, we need to go forward to democratic rights or socialism, they're like, they destroyed the machine. But there was different venues and reactions that came about. Universal suffrage was a demand of union movements and workers and peasants. You had the Chartist movement, 10-hour work days. You had anti-capitalist tendencies emerge, the utopian socialist tendency, which made a lot of advancements, and pushed the movement for working class struggles further. But it was ultimately Karl Marx and his understanding of scientific socialism, which is the most accurate, which there was actually struggles within the First International. That's largely what the first section about, is between the scientific socialist branch and the utopian socialist branch and the anarchist trend. Do you got any response on the first section?
Yeah, look, it's what we're just talking about there, the conditions of the working class, predominantly in Britain at the time. And I got to understand the conditions were appalling. They lived in dark, dank living conditions. I mean, children were sent down. Yes, children were working in coal mines, in factories. I mean, young as down to 5 or 6 years old. You're in your infants when you basically started working. Their life expectancy wasn't very long either. You'd be lucky to live into your 30s. In some aspect, and they really, just the health and well-being of the working class was there as well, and that was all due to the capitalist modes of production. But the advances were, it's how we changed production relations from the feudal structure, and under feudalism it wasn't heaven on earth either. It was reactionary in its final end, and what you're seeing when capitalism came into being in the UK into Britain first, it actually played a progressive role. It was an advancement more from feudalism, where we produced more than ever. We'll be able to communicate better, transport things much better than we would under feudal property relations. But what we saw this on is the merging working class in this situation as well, and how that was coming into being a lot more. And when you're seeing this around the world, it just was the formation of the international, of the First International. What you were seeing around predominantly Europe at the time and America, was the coming into being of the working class of all those countries through those various bourgeois revolutions, the ones such as happened in the 1840s in both Germany and France, just as clear examples. And then the further industrialisation from then on. And obviously, when we go through this book a lot more, we'll explain a lot more about the coming into being of the working class. So I'll hand it back to you. Sorry.
If you want to go right into the second section on scientific socialism.
Yes. Just saying that. It's on page 21. Now, obviously, it starts with when Marx, when in one of his younger years, in it wasn't actually known as Germany, it was in Prussia. And mind you, keep in account, what we know as modern day Germany back then was actually, you could say, a federation or a loose connection of various kingdoms at the time. And obviously, his father his father was a lawyer, and he wanted Karl Marx to be a lawyer as well. And then he turned his attention to philosophy, history, and science. And obviously, in 1841, he had his PhD. He studied deeply in the main works of Hegel. Now, Hegel was a previous philosopher who was much influenced by materialism. But what Marx did is turn the whole thing around when he was talking about between materialism and idealism. So although he was some form of materialist, he was still connected to idealism, and obviously along with Ludwig Feuerbach. When at the time he was graduated, Germany was in a revolution at the time, and obviously there was by then it was actually consistent by both the bourgeoisie and the masses at the time to consolidate it into a country, and it was sort of very influenced, but obviously things went to a certain thing where certain royalty or monarchy got in control again, and obviously became quite reactionary. And Marx, and alongside Engels, and a lot of Germans at the time had to flee. A lot went to the United States, and some went to England. Just so I don't get sidetracked, I'm led to believe too, a lot of them actually did come out to Australia for the 1850s gold rush period in both Victoria and mostly New South Wales as well. So there's quite a connection there. But obviously, once Engels and Marx was in England at the time, there was obviously the Chartist movement happening and overnight movements, and so they're moving forward, getting themselves involved in working class struggles. But I think the most important thing in England at the time, when they teamed up with other German I wouldn't call Marxists at the time, no one called themselves a Marxist, but his fellow comrades, they formed the Communist League. Now, there was a sort of confusion if it was a party. It wasn't a party as what we would know it today. It was a league of those comrades, and through that, they actually nominated Marx and Engels to actually come up with a draft program. And as we all know, it's called the Communist Manifesto, the first ever revolutionary program for comrades at that time. And it's still quite valid to this day. Quite interesting. It actually had everything in it. It had philosophy, it had political economy in it, and social science, and where we came into being from there on as the working class, and also a 10-point program to campaign on from there as well. So I think it was last year, the year before, them something to do with the 150th anniversary of that manifesto. But it was what effect it had on everybody was huge, even the bourgeoisie. Obviously, a spectre is haunting Europe, and that spectre is communism. And when you open that book, the opening lines, hitherto of all history is history of class struggle, and no other document up to then had that. And obviously, from then on, they developed further into scientific socialism. Now, what was just previously said, you've probably heard about the utopian socialism, like Saint-Simon and various others at the time. It was more or less socialism was an ideal. Well, actually, socialism wasn't an invention of Marx and Engels. It was a previous one of the utopians there that came up with that idea during the French Revolution. But what we don't understand is just how we're going to get there, and it needed a proper scientific program, because all sorts of experiments tried before didn't happen. And although the name just totally went out of my head, but there was a particular French revolutionary at the time. His idea was to invite all these very wealthy people to come around and forego all their wealth and that, so we can have a genuine socialist society. Well, he was pretty much the only person in the room. No one turned up to that special meeting. So it's like today. Well, obviously, yes, we like socialism. It's how we're going to get there properly, and we do it properly. And like with Marx and Engels back then, they had their fights and their arguments, fierce debates, of how we go forward with the others, like the anarchists and the utopians. And it's like we still do today as well. There's no one concrete plan, for it, but it is a science, and this is where it proves it's not a dogma. It's a living science and applied to today's current conditions, like Marx and Engels did back then. Obviously, I just touched on the Communist League and the manifesto, and obviously through the revolutionary program as well. And as we go through, we're talking about dialectics. I'll just touch on the dialectical and historical materialism. And what Marx and Engels were talking about then, if they just said they turned all the works of Hegel and all previous philosophers on their head, and they said, well, basically what it is, matter is primary. And so the question was, what's primary, what's secondary? So you had matter, then the idea, not the other way around. Before, it was always believed this great being, something that's physically outside of us, that's created all this. No, they actually turned that on its head. And it's vitally important to understand too what they explain in dialectical materialism, that things can only go forward, not back. And even when you look at what's happening now, what's happening in the US, or even around the world, there's still some hoping we go back to this dream of the 60s and all the full boom like that. We're not going back to that period. You can only keep forward, and it keeps moving forward in a spiral fashion. It might appear, a lot of the events that happen might appear on the outside looking very similar to what something happened many years ago. But in fact, when you look into it, it's actually completely different circumstances. And just like what's happening in the US now, and I think one thing that's quite important about dialectical and oracle materialism, scientific socialism, it's a tool for the working class to achieve power. And I think that's the primary thing what Marx and Engels was talking about. It's about the class achieving power. And working class will need to organise their own structures and organise them in such a way so they can achieve that. And I'll get just what's a very exciting development that's happening in the US. I'm noticing in Seattle there with the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, is that what it's called? This is young working class people organising. People say, oh, it's anarchists or it's socialists. Well, yes, they're helping it and assisting it and conducting what they need to do there. But the majority of it is young working class people. So, and they've come to realise, and another interesting development, young working class people in the US, regardless you're black, white, brown, or yellow, are questioning the whole entire capitalist system because they're not being provided anymore. So that is a very interesting development. This is where we can apply dialectical and historical materialism. We can apply it right. As material conditions change, people's ideas and thinking changes as well. So then it's actually there's going to be a lot of lessons learned from this as well. And as Mal correctly said one time, revolution's not a dinner party. A dinner party. And I think from this, I think we'll see how it goes forward from there on. But there's some big, powerful lessons to learn from this as well, where something that's triggered a movement is now can turn into something else. And when you explain in dialectical and historical materialism or Marxist philosophy, scientific socialism, what we're seeing is quantitative changes into a qualitative one. Because what Marx and Engels said, you can't just go from here to socialism like that. In one point, they said there's a whole process. There's a whole our matter developed and conditions developed further on. They will move us into a revolutionary path, and that's the powerful thing about the scientific socialism, because we can see things right through things. We can see what we need to do and how we can apply it. It's I'll say it's not scientific socialism. Is not a dogma. It's a toolbox. Basically, you can use and picture prevailing conditions around you, and sometimes. What Marx and Engels said, was looking at, it wasn't like, things can happen quite slowly for many weeks, and all of a sudden things can pick up very quickly, like it has been now in the last 2 months. And that's something we've got something now to work from, and how we can apply that today. So going through that, and obviously there's quite a little bit of read on scientific socialism, but it's obviously, if you've got any questions about that, feel free to ask it as well. But I think going through it, when he wrote that first document, the Communist Manifesto, right up to Marx's last works in Capital, but also Engels as well. I think there's so much wealth of it, but start from particularly there, and you can actually relate it to what conditions and what struggles we're going through now. I think I've got any covered. Is there anything you want to add on there, Dustin?
Yeah, I just have two minor. Well, first off, I really like the spiral argument of history doesn't go forward; it sometimes retreats. But I like the idea. It seems to be going in a circle, but the circle is moving forward. There's a popular quote in the United States, especially in the Black Belt South, from Martin Luther King, is that the arc of justice is long, but the arc of history is long, but it curves towards justice. I'm a horrible misphrasing of that quote, but essentially that. And I like that. It kind of goes on with a spiral, which is like the material conditions pushing forward history forward. And I thought it was interesting that it discussed Marx was against the time period, which was feudalism, coming out of feudalism. He was against idealism and the idea that all things are representative of ideas or God. But he also spoke out against vulgar economic determinism, which is this idea that ideas have no effect on our society whatsoever. But I think he explained it as kind of a play back and forth, is that the material conditions create the ideas that can help change society, and those things work upon each other to push things further. Because if it was completely based on materialism only, which it primarily is, why are we sitting here discussing political understanding and trying to get political understanding up if it has no effect on the material world? But it does. But it's us sitting here, me sitting here in the United States, truck driver from the United States, you sitting over there in Australia, a profession as Boilermaker, two working class individuals. Why are we sitting here talking about something? It's because we want to change history. That's and right. Ideas do change history, but ideas come from and are made possible from the material conditions. Another thing, specifically on the American side, he mentioned how political figures like Madison actually understood elements of class struggle, but they didn't, see it as clearly as Marx did.
Yep.
So I'll go into. Do you want? I'm not sure if we have time to read the comments. Let me catch up a little bit with the comments before we move on to section 3. Tommy Gura, yep. Tony, yeah, it's Tony Garea. I agree. Debbie David, Doming, I believe he's meant coming in loud and clear into New Zealand. And just recently, I can't pronounce that either. Attest Engels, the production and reproduction of real life constitutes, in the last instance, the determining factor of history. Neither Marx nor I ever maintain more. I'm not sure if there's a version of the reading online.
I'm not aware of that.
Did you find one?
No,
I tried to find an audiobook of it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any audio or podcast version of it, if that's what you're referring to.
No, is there a version?
Yeah, you might try Marx's Internet Archive or something. May possibly one of those sites have it, but yeah, otherwise, I'm not aware of anywhere else. Okay.
This is an ongoing study. This is only the first section. This will probably take part over 4 weeks. If people want to go ahead and order it online, I got mine on Amazon, so you can catch up with next week and just kind of enjoy the discussion this week. Next week, not this week, but probably the coming week, if schedule permits. We're probably going to be going over the second section if people want to read and prepare. So I'll go ahead and go on to section 3 or chapter 3 within part 1. It's just on page 30, the Revolution of 1848. This is really where capitalism is taking root. They had something called the Continental Revolution, which pushed forward the gains of the bourgeois, which pushed forward some gains of the bourgeoisie or some struggles of the bourgeoisie working with the working class to push out reactionary feudal elements. We had one in France, another in Germany. I believe they were. Okay, let me look. These revolutions were pushing for democratic rights. Had elements of the proletariat assisting the bourgeois. There's actually it's actually interesting. There's this idea of the permanent revolution, which is the idea that the bourgeois revolution will awaken the forces of the workers and then almost immediately push into the socialist revolution. And actually, my guess from last week, what actually assisted me in this reading, my guest from last week, I hope people caught that interview, made a book, Marxist Glossary Discussion by Daryl Waistline Mitchell. If people saw that interview, I mean, he was a great, intelligent, dynamic, funny, even humorous, lovable character who took part in the Dodge Revolutionary the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement. And you can actually go and look up kind of their American, trying to define basic Marxist terms in the current theory, specifically to the U.S. And I actually decided I'm going to look up the permanent revolution and see what they had to say on it. And it says Marx's and Engels' concept of the permanent revolution was uninterpreted progress and the social progress based on the consciousness of the fighting section of the proletariat and its ability to safeguard the interest of the proletariat from one stage of the revolution to the next. I actually found this helpful. I thought it was interesting. And I don't know, I'm not sure if it's this section or another section where William Z. Foster talks about how Trotsky distorted that understanding of permanent revolution to kind of a left adventurist idea that it's not possible to have revolution in one country, which the advances by Stalin obviously proved wrong. But I'll get back to the task at hand. So also Germany in 1848. And actually, I believe Marx actually went and was a part of the revolution, was helping to push the revolution. Not only was he a philosopher, he went out and supported revolutions itself. And eventually, in the revolution of 1848, there was capitalist betrayal of the middle class and peasant and working class allies in the revolution in 1848. So feudalism caused pain and suffering and contradictions amongst the bourgeoisie, amongst the peasants, amongst the working class, and these forces came together, opposed the feudal order. But ultimately, in the Revolution of 1848, the bourgeois became more scared of the peasantry and the working class, and actually went back to some of their actually decided to work with the feudalist system in fear of the direction that the working class elements were going towards. Another interesting thing, so, was the involvement of an August Willich and other German revolutionaries that actually helped the democratic movement in the United States, were a part of the revolutions coming out of Europe, specifically the German Revolution. And it's interesting. It's interesting here in the United States. When you think of Republicans, you don't think of communists. You think of the reactionary, Donald Trump and folks like that, and fascist. But Marx was so supportive of the second, which he called the Second American Revolution, the Civil War, and he actually had a bit of a feud with a general who was a communist. He was actually August Willich, which led a battalion in the Civil War, the war that ended slavery, the Second American Revolution. He actually was a left adventurist who had a bit of a feud with Marx, and later gone. And I thought that was interesting. Okay. Any comments to add on the second section, David? Or the third section? I'm at the third section, Revolution of 1848.
Well, I think this is actually, this will be also talked about in the next section about the founding of First International. A lot of those revolutions of the 1840s, there was a lot of powerful lessons to be learned from there as well, and especially with the onslaught of reaction they ran at the 1848 period in both France and Germany at the time. So through some of these defeats, there was some powerful lessons for the working class. And when this was all written, it was all about it was more or less what Marx and Engels has compiled through their own experiences, but other experiences from other comrades at the time, the pros and cons and what to be aware of. So hence when they first wrote the manifesto and right through up to the establishment of the National Working Men's Association, I think it's quite vitally important that all these lessons were learned. They were powerful lessons. When you have a read of it, look, if there's any comments, any questions about that, I think it's well noted down, and we'll try and answer it to our best of endeavours. So, I think that's
okay. If you want to go on to the next section.
Well, the next one is the founding of the First International in 1864. On that. Yeah, but look, this was founded on all those. There was quite a lot of struggles happening everywhere at that time when the founding of this vitally important. Back then, we had the Chartist movement, had internationalist trends. You had the Fraternal Democrats, which was a mixture of English fighters and European exiles. And Marx and Engels were very close to the Fraternal Democrats. I'm not too sure if they were actually members, but certainly they worked very closely there, and the Universal League of Workers. And also important too at that time during the early 1860s, you had the American Civil War, and you had the abolition movements played in both Britain and America at the time. And the workers were heavily involved in it. And I believe actually Marx organised workers internationally because Britain was supporting the Confederacy at the time. They needed the cheap cotton as a raw resource. Their cotton mills in England at the time, and they're prepared to fund it. So obviously the working class position was we're not cooperating with this opposition to the opposition to slavery and and the defeat of the Confederacy, which played a very important part. So during that time, it was still around. This is where the first international played. And when I was actually reading through this a little while back, there was just amazing from all over. It wasn't just Britain. There had also France, Germany, and elsewhere around Europe and in America as well. There was that consistent solidarity to defeat the Confederacy. And I think, look, I will say this has been, unfortunately, over the years, there's been a lot of romantic views about the Deep South, Confederacy. It's completely false. It was a disaster. It was nasty. It was just basically, it was brutal. It was backward in the sense where it to enslave people. It was certainly a threat to the working class overall. And look, to thank Marx and Engels playing a leadership role in that, obviously with correspondence to the US, and a lot of Marx's comrades, the early communists, were in fighting in that war on the Union side. I believe, and this has been said in various videos before, I believe it was actually a Union general. I don't know his name. Again, it disappeared, but he was actually a communist as well, and led the defeat of the Confederacy. So you could, at that time, you could see what was happening around the world, American Civil War, what was happening around Europe, and this is why it was important that Marx and Engels saw the importance of why we're international. The working class coming to be, we're actually international. In the early stages before then, you had the separate craft unions and trade unions. Originally, the first initial struggles might have been separate from each other, but it was what workers learnt and what Marx and Engels drove the importance of is unity amongst the working class, and we're going to defeat a common foe, and how we can actually support each other through that unity. And obviously, that's the whole basis through it. And obviously, when it goes through next year, is obviously they had to set out a program and moving forward to it. And I did have something noted down here as well with the program and constitution of the IWA. And I think it's obviously the working class, when it comes down to just it, needs to come up with its own political economy, its own superstructure, its own economic basis in order to form its superstructure. They're the early signs of that as well. And but further on in this book, it probably explains a bit further the importance of it. But you can see where with workers trying to struggle separately, they may get a little gain, but it's being always taken off them again. They can be easily defeated. But if they're organised on an international scale, they're a lot stronger force and able to achieve the results they want. And I just want to, just a little paragraph I like reading this. It was from, I believe it was from Engels, I think it was. All goes that the emancipation of labour is neither a local nor a national, but a social problem embracing all countries which modern society exists, and depending for its solution on the concurrence, practical and theoretical, of the most advanced countries. The present revival of the working classes in the most industrious countries of Europe, while it raises a new hope, gives solemn warning against a relapse into old errors and calls the immediate combination of the still disconnected movements. So that's why it's the importance of having that international, because if we don't learn from the old errors and we become disconnected, not prepared to work things, be united and work things in a coordinated way, we just wind up having bit of defeat after bit of defeat. It certainly is it was quite an historical thing. It was the first time ever in human history that workers around the world were united under one common banner, the International Working Men's Association. And look, just also too, I was talking to someone about that title one time, and they said the working man. Well, just remember keep it in context as well of the English language of that time. That's what they tend to use. For years, you were known as a tradesman, an artist, etc., etc. Look, it's just, there's nothing about it. So I won't go into deviate too far, but just keep that in that context. But it was certainly, it was quite an advancement to where they were separated from the various national or local struggles. So this, for the first time in human history, we're now struggling on an international scale. So, yeah, I reckon it's a really good, exciting read, and fortunately, there's a lot more detail I'll probably talk about, but we can spend all day talking just on that alone. So, Dust, do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, just the president's of the United States' recent comments or comments that he made. It's 2020, and we have a president in the United States who who blasts off things like "What Happened to Gone with the Wind,"
Yeah.
a movie designed by Hollywood to glorify the old South, to
Yeah.
glorify slavery,
Yeah.
um, that glosses over the fact that poor whites, who were non-slave owners, who were workers, who had to compete with slave labor, had a dismal time. Not nearly to the amount of suffering of chattel slavery, one of the
Mm.
worst, one of the worst things in human history. Period.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't good for the majority of white workers. It was backwards, disgusting,
Yeah.
horrible. One of
Yeah.
the worst things that's ever happened in humans history. We have a president in the United States who goes around saying stuff. Whatever happened to Gone with the Wind?
Mm.
I think HBO actually took off the Gone with the Wind for given the political mobilization around George Floyd. I'm not sure it was HBO, whoever owned Gone with the Wind, took it off
Mm.
their streaming service and then
Yeah.
put it back on their streaming service, with an introduction from an African American intellectual, that gave a
Mm.
little more political context, so it wasn't so obviously insulting, to
Yeah.
our understanding. And back in the Civil War itself, there was working people, um, and there was revolutionaries, people understanding the class struggle back then, that knew enough uh, of the idea of solidarity to oppose slavery. And communists were on the forefront, or a large part of the abolitionist movement participated in the war, as I said, against slavery. August Willock. It's crazy that he could, the president could, today,
Yeah.
could say something like
Well,
that.
well, there's a lot of
Um,
discussion around here too, just on that. I'm sorry, go detracting about taking down our colonial statues of Captain Cook, etc. And same discussion happening in Britain as well, not in the country, but a lot of people are saying, "Oh no, we should retain them there and everything else." Well, the question I would ask, well, Germany doesn't have any statues of Adolf Hitler or Heinrich Himmler or Joseph Mengele, and they don't have streets named after them, like Adolf Hitler Street and Hermann Goering Boulevard. It's so Germany. Oh, look at Germany. If they can, so should we. And it's yeah. So all those who are proposing to get rid of all those monuments and Confederate flag and etc. Yes, good on you. So they should be removed as well. Sorry about that. A little tirade there.
that's fine.
Mm.
Um, the next section, section 5 of this book, um, on page 43, this book refers back to this section in the later parts of this part several
Yep.
times. And if you read anything of Marx, I recommend, first of all, I recommend people getting this book. And if you're going to read other parts of Marx, this is like a textbook. It's almost as good as a reference guide to understand, for working class people to understand socialism. And Marx makes a lot of in his books and his essays. Let's see, the poverty of philosophy. Um, I have the section here. Uh, Value, price, and profit. A lot of these were polemics against other socialists at the time, and he makes reference to them, and you really don't understand them just diving into those books. But if you read, like, this gives you a framework of the entire First International and points out the characters that Marx is doing these polemics against. And this chapter, chapter 5, titled Trade Unionism, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right because I mostly read Marxism. Haven't said the names out loud too much. Proudhon, Lassalle, Balkanen. Um, he goes through and he just points out several left and right deviations from scientific socialism. And the first one he mentions in this is trade unionism, or or They call it pure trade union, pure and simple trade unionism, which which is a which especially applied to, if you applied this idea, the right opportunistic tendency of pure and simple trade unionism, which was basically where you have mostly skilled workers working in their interests, who don't see the larger picture, who just see the day to day fights, are more likely to become reformists, are less likely to think about the needs of the working class in general, are more likely to work alongside the bourgeoisie. And if you take this and apply this to the U.S. trade unionism and the what has come about with the labor aristocracy in this country, you can see the limitations of just trade unionism itself. Like the period of like the hard hats who backed Nixon, horrible, corrupt war criminal, because it was in the interests of the labor aristocracy. This is how you can apply the right deviation from Marxism of pure and simple trade unionism. Um, it also mentions, I kind of skipped into the several left and right deviations of scientific socialism, which Marx did polemics against. There's actually a really good definition of Marxist Leninism in this section as well. And find William Z. Foster's kind of basic summary of Marxist Leninism. He called it the sum total of lessons learned by the proletariat and its allies and their worldwide, and the worldwide century-long battle against the exploiting classes. I thought that was pretty profound understanding of the term Marxist-Leninism to the great revolutionary William Z. Foster. The next form of deviation or political tendency that Marx fought against was Blanchism. Blanquism, French, supported by Louis Augustin Blanqui, French revolutionary, he was always pushing armed insurrection. He didn't build any organization. He wasn't in favor of any bit of like building a party or building unions. It was constantly just fight in the streets, which has its downsides as well. The people need gains to continue. They need rest. This is not Blanchism. You can actually see connections later on with this glorification of violence from the Maoists and others, where they don't see as China building something positive. They don't see the Sandinistas and in Nicaragua taking power and building things and lifting people. They don't see that. They glorify Maoists in Peru, like the Shining Path movement, or they glorify Maoists in India who are having squabbles against each other. And it's another left tendency. Another right tendency he mentioned, which was really strong in his period, Proudhonism. Pierre Joseph Proudhon, which basically I would consider it a right deviation, but it also has some left deviation characteristics, because it was basically the modern anarchism. And he wrote the Philosophy of Poverty, which Marx came out with. The poverty of philosophy was in response to Proudhon. Proudhon pushed for cooperatives, free mutualist societies. He essentially wanted to buy capitalism, or buy the means of production from the bourgeoisie. And he was also very anti-labor. He came up no strikes. He was actually very anti-labor. He opposed strikes. He essentially wanted workers to essentially buy the means of production.
Yeah.
So I believe he was both right opportunistic and left. Right is within working with the bourgeois forces, and left is in his anarchism, which is also not establishing working class organizations, building unions. All right, and then we go to another, I believe, right deviation or right tendency, which is Lassallism. Ferdinand Lassell. He was in support of government subsidized cooperatives, universal suffrage, and he was also anti-union. And he came up with this thing called the iron law of wages, which is the basic idea. If you were to increase wages, it's just going to create, it's just going to make everything else more expensive, which is flawed. And Marx proved that wrong in his book or his pamphlet, Value, Price, and Profit, where he showed that working class people, Marx showed against Ferdinand Lassalle, that you can make gains. And this goes to today, like this flawed understanding of the iron law of wages. This is often used against today's struggle of the Fight for 15 movement. If you ask people the Fight for 15 movement, oh, it's just going to raise prices everywhere. No, it actually gives workers more power. I mean, it's not the end all get all of raising wages, but it's definitely an immediate gain that helps the lives of working people.
Yep.
There's also Marx in his polemics against Lassalle said it was common at the time. It mentioned this in the reading, which I think is interesting. I've heard a few socialists repeat the idea of fair days, the more bourgeois, fair day's wage for a fair day's work, which sounds good even today's standpoint. That sounds good, but Marx was really pushing for the abolition of the wage system.
Yeah.
And then we continue on to another left deviation, Bakunism. Michael Bakunin, wealthy Russian, similar to Prohound. He pushed for insurrectional attacks. He was a little bit more pro-union. He pushed the idea of anarcho-syndicalism. He was very militantly atheist. This is why I call Bakunism left, kind of a left deviation, because he was basically an anarchist, and he was very militantly anti-religious. And his understanding took place in places where the church had a lot of power. So, I mean, it's understandable they come about this position. But some of these very militantly atheist groups are still a tendency within socialism today, and maybe to a degree that's too much, where the idea is to build power and gain power. And if there's people who are inspired by faith, who have organizations, we should work with those organizations. I mean, this isn't the feudal period where the bishops, I think to a degree it happens, where the bishops are, simply there to justify the power of the king. I mean, we've had the Reformation and other things, and there's been different, more progressive versions of Christianity. And even Bakunists, militant, anti-government, anti-religion, no political action, no political dictatorship. Um, was I believe a left adventurist position that Marx went against. And then so that's what I had. That chapter, trade unionism, Proudism, Lassallism, Balkanism. That really helps you understand when you try to read Marx
Yep.
Later on. Any response to that?
I think you pretty much covered it. I think I think it's also vitally important to understand where do these ideologies come from in the first place? What are the material conditions that give or material basis that gives rise to these? Very important, because you look at some of the countries these people came from, and capitalism hadn't really developed yet. You might have had some capitalist production relations, but feudalism was still there. It was going out of being at the time. So, and obviously, a lot of those very early anarchists were actually more involved in organising peasants against a feudal lord and such, not so much where Marx and Engels was organising working class against the capitalist class. So against where we get these ideologies come from. So obviously from all backward countries, you would certainly the conditions at that time weren't right to sort of give any other type of ideology. So it wasn't just like in Europe and Britain and Russia all and the US all at the same time had suddenly bang capitalism. All right, now we've got this. No, it didn't work that way. It was based on the uneven developments of any particular country. So always aware people. I know there was a comment about talking about the Chaz about being liberal. Well, let's understand. Well, okay, why? Find out what the material conditions or what material basis why it would be. But keeping in mind, like we were just talking before, through scientific socialism, everything's in a constant state of change. Nothing's static, nothing's permanent. So it's in a constant state of change, and that could have a good possibility of developing into some far higher form of organisation, a proper structure to take on hopefully have ways through not just the US but around the world models we can take on the capitalist system. So,
I think I'll just read this comment by I don't know how to pronounce this. I have trouble with pronouncing word. Etastis. Okay. Lassalle is the perfect example of unification of right opportunism and some kind of ultra leftism. That's a pretty accurate statement. If you want to go on to the next section.
Okay, the next section is consolidation, the Geneva Congress of 1866. Obviously, that was there for first international Congress. It was going to be held in Belgium in the 1865, but because of it was still quite a very reactionary nature of the Belgian government, they had to look at and also have a place to have the Congress. They wound up having it in Geneva the following year. Obviously, this was actually grounded with a lot of enthusiasm from a lot of workers from around the world, or in those countries at the time. And just as I said before in the previous chapter, we had all the Macunists there, the Proudhonists, everyone else there. So there was a mixed mash of ideologies in it, but it was the first historical meeting of that time of the National Workmen's Association. And I think it's, and like I've said in the previous, one of the previous chapters, it was an historic moment. It finally, and what Marx and Engels and their comrades were actually looking at, well, they were actually looking at trying to develop some form of party out of this, like a proper international party to coordinate the working class further. And obviously, to achieve power. So this is why the importance about setting up structure in the first place, and this was on an international level. So you had from all around Europe, Russia, and keep in mind, it's not all the European countries are completely developed into capitalist countries yet. So you had a mixed mash of people, and even also a good section of the petty bourgeois as well turned up, and obviously they were also all national revolutions, and obviously they had their own. There was quite a considerable number of them, actually, to be honest with you, and but they were oblivious to the proletarian character of the International Working Association. Obviously, there was all sorts of struggles. There would have been a lot of argument for the first time, so that's nothing new. Everyone comes into these organisations have got their own ideas, and that was something that's associated with levels of the development. You had a composition of mixed man. For example, from Britain at the time, a lot of leaders of the union movement started to become, or actually, Marx just cheaply called them actual Labour kingdoms of London. You've always, it was just mentioned before about Labour aristocracy, and look. Yes, there were forms of that, but so you had a mixed match there, and you had those that came in from the Civil War in the US as well, and they've obviously then shared their experience there. And what I think was those important things about the main points on the agenda was, and what concrete plans they had to deal with at that considerable time. I just want to read this little paragraph because the agenda was to consolidate the help of the association. The efforts that have been made in different countries through the struggle between labour and capital. That was the first one. 2, the trade unions, their past, present, and future. 3, cooperative labour. 4, direct and indirect taxes. 5, shorter working hours. 6, female and child labour. And 7, the Moscow invasion of Europe and the restoration of independent integral Poland, which just on that was a very big issue at that time for the Poles. And 8, the permanent armies, the influence on the interests of the working class. So obviously that would have actually a lot there to take on. I'm assuming that they might have wanted to add more there, but there was a lot to go through at that time as well. And these were important historical, for that time, was really important issues that had to affect them. And I'll just give you one classic example. Shorter working hours. It's always been an issue with us for well over 100 years to reduce the short week with no loss in pay. That's always one of the key demands, especially the trade union movement. And obviously, we had the 10-hour movement or 10-hour bill in England, and then you had obviously the 80-hour movement after that. And obviously in Australia here, for example, when places achieved a 35-hour week, the 38-hour week, and in construction, the 36-hour week. So it was always a continual battle. So a lot of these were important to the working class at the time. They had to obviously work about the rules of the organisation. They just set something up and expect complete chaos. We need to have some form of structure within it. And I know that in the past there'll be something out there. So, this is all about control and power. No, it's actually about having a proper functioning organisation. You don't just get together and then just turn out to get nowhere. But they've also made actually important parts, and I just want to emphasise a good connection with the trade union question, and much attention was paid to the matter of international strike breaking, because what the bourgeoisie did at the time to break strikes was import workers from other countries to try and bust, trying to break the picket line or break the strike. But obviously what this brought in is it actually took that power away from the bourgeoisie. So you're not strike breaking anymore, and it helped to coordinate those workers how to support each other. So it's vitally important why that organisation was put together like that. And obviously as time moved on, it had a great influence in other areas around the world as well. And I think it worked out that the workers, as I said, when they realised how international were, how they can help each other, how to support each other during strikes and other struggles, and provide any types of support there, support and assistance in one way or form or the other. But that was a perfect weapon to take away from. That was a perfect manoeuvre to take away from the bourgeoisie their ability to bust strikes at the time in such a way where they can import and say no more, and have the workers only united, which really worried the bourgeoisie. It was a direct threat to their power. So, do you want anything, Dustin? I think your screen's gone blurry or something. Hello? Oh, we seem to have a slight technical difficulty. His screen's frozen. I don't know if you can hear me. Just bear with me, people. I'll just find out what's going on. Call messenger, see what's going on.